Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Welcome in, everybody, to the first episode of GC Live Afternoon Drive on Thursdays. We are officially less than 48 hours away until South Carolina kicks off their season against North Carolina. Very excited, and I know there's a lot of Gamecock fans that have been waiting for this day for quite some time, especially the fact that they're not playing TikTok Tech. They're not playing a cupcake team week one. You're going to see South Carolina play a Power 5 team, and not just a Power 5 team, but a team that is ranked to start the season. So it's much different in comparison to years past, and that's no disrespect to the Georgia States of the world or the Eastern Illinois of the world. But the fact that South Carolina is playing a legitimate team week one, and you're going to find out how good USC is right from the jump. So a lot of stuff to get to on today's program. We're going to be joined by On3's JD Baquel. We actually taped that segment a little bit earlier. It's about a 25, 30-minute interview. So we will play that in the middle. And how this format will go, at least today, and moving forward, we're going to change things up. Hopefully be able to get the phone line working, which we will hopefully have working on Saturday. The GC Live postgame show will be up and running, and it looks like we're going to have former Gamecock quarterback Michael Scarnecchia joining us for that week one game. He's actually going to be at the game, so hopefully Mike doesn't have too many cocktails out there in the stands at Bank of America Stadium, but he'll be joining us from his phone. Where I want to begin today's show, though, is we're going to start talking about, I do a weekly column. I've been doing it all off season, but during the season, it's focused on the keys of the game. That's how I'm going to start off each show. So we're going to talk about my 3 keys that I feel like South Carolina needs to do in order to win this week against North Carolina. Then we're going to throw in the JD interview in the middle. And then at the end, if you guys have any questions, that's when I'm going to answer. I'm going to do my best to be able to answer those questions at the end of the show. But if you have some questions along the way, I'll be able to answer them hopefully during the course of the show. So trying to handle a couple of things right now while juggling this. Intern Joe, by the way, for those of you that don't know, he's going to have his own show on Sunday nights. I believe that time isn't cemented, but that will be launching this Sunday. It's called The Walkthrough, and that will be a recap of the week that was. On Mondays, Wes, Chris, they're going to have their regular GC Live program. They're going to be on actually Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Those shows at 2 o'clock. Tuesday night, talking Tuesdays, that will stay the same at 7. And then on Thursdays, yours truly will be doing the afternoon drive. So with that all being said, heading into week one, with the South Carolina team, there's so many unknowns about USC. So many unknowns. We can talk about the running back position. We can talk about the offensive line. We can talk about what this offense will ultimately look like with a new play caller in Dow Loggins. But another thing, too, is just how young this team is. How young this team is. And I don't think people really can fathom it, or it just gets kind of overlooked from the simple fact that you do return your starting quarterback, a guy that is heading into his 5th year of college, and that being Spencer Rattler. So I say that because that scares me, I think, more than anything when we're looking at this game, because when you have such a young team, and as I put this out today on Gamecock Central, for those of you that are subscribers and had a chance to see it already, what I talked about is the importance of this young team having short-term memory. Because when you're looking at the 2 deep right now, South Carolina has either 10 true freshmen or redshirted freshmen who appeared on that 2 deep depth chart that came out earlier this week. At some point, you're going to see true freshmen out there, or you're going to see redshirted freshmen, and some of those redshirted freshmen, they never even played last year, or they appeared in 4 or less games to make sure that they maintained that year of eligibility. On top of that, you have a lot of sophomores. Of course, okay, you look at the safety position. DQ Smith's back, Nicky Manwari. Those aren't the guys that I'm talking about. I'm talking about sophomores who don't have the experience in comparison to some of the other players that are going to be out there on the field. And on top of that, some players like the Nick Gargiulos of the world, throw in Mario Anderson, they have college experience, but they don't have SEC experience. So there's a lot of unknowns when you're looking at just the youth of this team and the lack of SEC experience across the board. That concerns me the most, I think, heading into this weekend. Number two, what concerns me? Keeping Rattler upright. We've heard all preseason how great of a job Spencer has done and how he has been on the money when it comes to his passes. I mean, defensive coordinator Clayton White just a week ago, he said he couldn't wait because if you gave him just a little room, just a little bit of room, despite the talented players they have in the secondary, which, look, you're replacing Darius Rush, you're replacing Cam Smith. That's not an easy feat to be able to overcome heading into week one, especially against a very talented quarterback in Drake May. But I do feel like South Carolina, they do have some guys who can step up and that will be ready week one at those cornerback spots as well as nickel. But what does this offense look like from an offensive line standpoint? You know, Colin Taylor and I, we talked about it last week, how from an interior standpoint, South Carolina, at least on paper, they look pretty strong. They look pretty good heading into this game. But the question is, what will be on the outsides? Your left tackle position, your right tackle position. I asked Dal Loggins yesterday during his media availability how confident and how good he feels about the offensive line at that point after Wednesday's practice. And you could tell in his voice that they're still working through some things. As he mentioned, competition, it is still there. It's still ongoing. They're still trying to figure out, in his words, what's going to be the best decision for the football team. That is concerning because, again, we can talk about the running back position and just how there's so many unknowns there, but if they cannot protect Rattler, if they cannot get a push up front, it could be a long, long day. It could be a long, long day for South Carolina. Now, having said all that, and I still have another key to the game I'm going to get to. Having said all that, if this offense comes out and they can protect Rattler, and I understand there's going to be people that said, well, you know what, North Carolina, defensively, they weren't that great last year. I hear you. I'm not trying to discredit that. I mean, in fact, last season, the Tar Heels ranked 102 out of 132 teams in FBS in total defense. UNC allowed over 30 points a game, and they allowed 20 or more points in 13 of their 14 games last season because they played 14. So I'm not sitting here saying that you're going up against the freaking, the 85 Bears over here for crying out loud. But at the same time, too, we don't know what this offensive line will look like as a whole, as a unit. I think you have some talented guys up front, and that starts with Vershawn Lee. And even though Gargiulo hasn't played in the SEC, I expect him to come right in and to be able to make a big impact. And I would not be shocked if South Carolina, if they hit some hiccups this weekend, if they decide to bump Gargiulo out to the outside, that's something that could happen. I'm not saying it will happen in the game. It's always a possibility, and hopefully it doesn't come down to that point. But at the same time, too, they're figuring out what they have to do with this O-line because of the injuries that went back to obviously the spring and because of the lack of proven talent in depth at the offensive line position. So, again, if they can keep Rattler upright this weekend, if the tackle positions, which, again, heading into this game, they're listed as an or. And as Dal Loggins said yesterday, they're still working through it. If they can figure that out, I like South Carolina's chances from at least an offensive standpoint. Now, defensively, and that brings me to my final point, South Carolina has been hearing a lot about Drake May. And I know that there's a lot of Gamecock fans that are sick and tired of hearing May. We're going to hear from J.D. Baquel in a little bit, though. We talk about that a little bit. As talented as he is, I feel like South Carolina, what it'll come down to from a defensive standpoint is just simply stopping the run. Stopping the run. We sit here and we talk about the struggles that North Carolina had a year ago defensively. South Carolina, they had their struggles defensively as well. Now, I'm not saying that South Carolina's defense and North Carolina's defense last year were the same, because they weren't. However, one of the areas of concern from last year that comes on into this season too is the fact that USC, they couldn't stop a nosebleed last year. 198 yards rushing per game they allowed. That was the 14th worst in FBS. 14th worst. You have to replace a Zach Pickens, who of course was very talented, and took up a lot of space up front too at that defensive tackle position. On paper, I think Tonka Hemingway, I think when we talk about the 2023 season, I think Tonka is going to have a hell of a year. And I think he's going to be able to put himself in a position where he is selected high in the draft. That's how high I am on him this season. Next to him is Boogie Huntley. When Boogie is healthy, and Boogie showed that last season before getting banged up, I think it was the second game of the year against Arkansas. So he didn't start as many games as he probably would have if he didn't get banged up. When Boogie is healthy, he has proven what he is capable of doing. If Boogie can stay healthy, if Tonka can stay healthy, I really like what South Carolina can do at the defensive tackle position. Linebacker-wise, which gets overlooked so much when we talk about stopping the run, because it's not just about the defensive tackles. It's not just about the defensive end or the edge either, but the linebackers, in particularly the middle linebackers, I really like what South Carolina has from a depth standpoint. Now, some of that you have to see a little bit more to truly get a feel of how good this linebacking core will be this season, right? I mean, Stone Blanton, for crying out loud, he's going to be making his first career start. It's a sophomore. He looks slim. He's trimmed down. He's talked about. He feels like he's moving around a hell of a lot quicker than how he did last year. But what does he look like when he has to play 60, 70 plus plays in a game? It's much different in comparison to only having to play 20, 30 snaps a game. And that's not even including special teams if he's also out there, which, as we know, USC is not afraid to put some of their starters out there on special teams because of the impact it has, not just in the game, but for them after being number one in the country last year in special teams efficiency. So I say that because with this team, this North Carolina team that everyone wants to talk about Drake May, and rightfully so, if South Carolina can't stop the run, they're going to be in for a long, long day. If they can stop the run, though, that helps you so much. Force North Carolina to pass on you. I know that sounds crazy, right? But the point is, make them one-dimensional. Make them have to throw the football every time. That helps your defensive lineman out. I mean, that obviously helps the secondary too, but that helps the defensive lineman out. When they know they can just put their freaking hand in the dirt and just go, go, go. Just rush the passer all game. It makes a big difference. So that is asking a lot from this defense. Again, a defense who they have their question marks. I mean, we're talking about the offensive line and how they have question marks on the outside at the tackle positions. Same could be said defensively. Edge, defensive end positions. The South Carolina defense, they have talent. And you look at it on paper, they have experience. Jordan Strawn, I mean, if anyone followed my work last year in Gamecock Central, going into the season, I said that he would lead the team in sacks. And unfortunately, his season was cut short after a knee injury against Arkansas. What type of Jordan Strawn do we get this season? Do we get 50% of that? I mean, he's gone through this before. He's had ACL injuries before. What type of Jordan Strawn do we get this season? Because if he can be even half as good as what he was and what he should have been last year before getting hurt, that gives South Carolina a big advantage. The question is now, how healthy can he stay? How healthy can a Terrell Dawkins stay? What type of impact do you get from some of the transfers who have come in to either play edge or defensive end? And how do some of the younger players develop as the season goes on? Because, and I said it in the spring, just from listening to Sterling Lucas talk about him, Desmond Umeozulu, that is a player I expect to see in there, I'd say about 20 snaps, 15 snaps as the course of the season plays out. Just because with his length, his speed, his strength, I feel like he's ready to go. Now, what it comes down to is, can he limit the mistakes? And that's not to say that he's in practice making mistakes left and right. But as a freshman, that's something you worry about. Going back to what I was talking about before with the mental errors, with having to have a short-term memory if you're a younger player here, right? You make a big-time play, that's great. You got to flush it. You screw up an assignment, you get burnt, whatever the case may be, you got to flush it. You know, everyone wants to say the phrase, you're only as good as your last play. My college coach, he would always say, no. You're only as good as your next play. I don't care what you just did. You have to flush it and move on to the next play. That's something that you can try to get these players prepared for, but until they're actually on the field and they're in that moment and they made a big time play and they're in front of a stadium of what will be 65, 70,000 at Bank of America Stadium, when that place is absolutely rocking and everyone's cheering for you, or if you made a mistake and everyone is cheering for the other team and you have that moment where you feel like you just want to dig a hole and put your head in it, how do you respond back? Those are unknown questions that until you actually get out there on the field, we're not going to be able to know. And that's what scares me a little bit about this team. Because they have the talent to not only win this weekend, but they have the talent to be successful this year. But can they put it all together quickly? Because you don't have that luxury, as I mentioned, of playing TikTok Tech, of playing a cupcake team in week one. I want to read some of the comments that we've been getting, and then we're going to turn our attention over to JD Baquel. And if you guys have any questions towards the end of the program, or maybe some thoughts as to what JD and I talked about, feel free to chime in, and we will punch those up towards the end of the show. I want to go back to some of the ones I plugged up earlier. It's me says, I talked about the important factor. T-Rob has improved the run defense for every team he's been at in year one. South Carolina's run defense improved from the end of the Muschamp era to year one. No question about it. And it's not just T-Rob. It's Clayton White as a defensive coordinator. Now, T-Rob has done when you keep saying T-Rob, people are going to get upset because they're going to think of the old T-Rob. Excuse me. I think you might be getting a little confused. Not T-Rob. Torian Gray, I think, is what you're talking about with the secondary. Clayton White is the defensive coordinator. T-Rob is not here anymore. But Clayton White has done a phenomenal job since he came in here with being able to create a defense that has forced turnovers, right? I mean, South Carolina led the conference in year one, number 2 last season. They've done a great job with their pass defense. They need to be able to improve the run defense, though. And that's why I said, despite the fact that Drake May is one of the best quarterbacks on paper heading into the season, you have to be able to stop the run. Because if I'm North Carolina, I'm looking at this game. Yeah, I have a great quarterback. But at the same time, too, South Carolina, they couldn't stop the run last year. And one of the things that JD and I talk about with South Carolina's defense, some of that has to do with the fact of just being able to finish tackles, right? I mean, this goes back to the Will Muschamp era. How many times did we hear people, whether it be on social media, could have been you, just watching the game, saying, man, freaking wrap up, finish your tackle. going up against Drake May this weekend, it's not just the fact that he can throw the football. He's dangerous with his legs as well. So you cannot lose contain, because if you do, it's not just the challenge of having to stop a quarterback who's very accurate and has a strong arm. It's the fact that he can beat you when he gets out of the pocket. So if you have an opportunity to wrap him up, if you have an opportunity to whether it be a tackle for a loss on a on a run or whatever the case may be, you have to be able to finish it this week. You have to. But especially if Drake May is scrambling around out there. No question about that. Moving along, William says, Pete Lembo said good news and started talking about people whose name was Nick. Yes, he was. And I'll say this too. I've mentioned this before. Yes, Nicholas Harbor has appeared on the 2 deep for this week. What his role is this week is still to be seen. I know there's been a lot of talk throughout the college football world, it seems like this past week, with depth charts. Now you think about Nick Saban and how they're not going to put a depth chart out until the actual game, it seems like at this point. What you see on the depth chart really doesn't mean anything until they get out there on the field. And that's not to say and try to scare you and be like, oh, well, Shane Beamer said on Tuesday that Nicholas Harbor will play. Juice Wells will play. That's not saying that they won't play. What I'm trying to get at is we just don't know yet how they're going to be used. Both of them have been practicing. Hopefully they're going to be as good to go, especially Juice Wells. But with Nicholas Harbor, if he is healthy, I really think he can make an impact on special teams right away. It sounds like he's still learning things from an offensive standpoint, which isn't uncommon for a freshman. And I'm so glad, too, that Shane Beamer mentioned on Tuesday that you go down the list of some of the starters they have and the number of starters, including Spencer Rattler, including a De'Carrion Joyner, including a Vershawn Lee. You go down the list, there's so many of those players that redshirted their freshman year. And I'm not trying to say Nicholas Harbor will redshirt this year. Obviously, they have the luxury of being able to play him in 4 regular season games and still being able to maintain his year of eligibility if they choose to do so. But my point being is he's still coming along as a wide receiver. He has speed. There's no question about that. But I would kind of simmer down on the expectations, at least heading into week 1. That doesn't mean, because of the obvious, his speed, that South Carolina doesn't throw him out there and, just runs a go pattern and he's gone. He catches a touchdown pass for 60, 70 something yards. I don't think that would surprise anybody. But my point being is I could see him making more of an immediate impact on special teams as someone on the punt rush unit because of his size, his strength, the length, and the obvious, that speed that he brings to the table. God Love Comics says, I watched a group of UNC commentators yesterday, and one said they hate to win this game because USC is one of the weaker teams on their schedule. Their schedule is all cream puffs in South Carolina and Clemson. I'll say this. The ACC has got better in comparison to where it was, say, 5 years ago. But at the same time, too, that is just a very, I'm trying to be nice. What's the word I want to use? You know what? Since we're in the South, we'll go with it. Just bless their hearts. Bless their hearts. I don't know what to tell you. Shoot. At least on paper heading into the year, Clemson, Florida State, those are 2 teams that will be very good in the ACC this year, or are expected to be. But North Carolina, my goodness. Take off the Carolina blue spectacles to those commentators. Alan says, offense sustained drives, D get off the field on 3rd downs. Yep. Simple as that, Alan. Comes down to that. Charles says, I'm a Clemson and Carolina fan all but 1 game of the year. I'm orange all day. I really think Carolina is going to win this North Carolina opener. I'm hoping the Gamecocks keep improving this year. I don't know. I'm going to assume when you say Carolina, you're saying South Carolina, because I know that's how South Carolina fans refer to themselves. And North Carolina fans, they like to say that, or at least people who like to bust the chops of Gamecock fans. Let's see. Richard says, like the talent at linebacker, put Stone Blandon on UNC's quarterback May all night. I am going to be interested to see what South Carolina has planned as far as trying to keep him contained and going back. And now where is it? I got you, William Jones now. Travian Robinson, you're talking about. I still have PTSD about T-Rob, the Will Muschamp era. So I apologize for that when you said that. Yeah, the new T-Rob, no one calls Travian that. I got you now. Yeah, I won't refer to Travian Robinson as T-Rob just because of the previous regime, but now I get what you're saying. Yeah, I think, look, and I'll say this. So we've had an opportunity to be out at practice for, I think, 4 practices, and the media was limited to the number of periods we were able to see. I think it's, if you had to do the math up, maybe like 22, 25 periods, something like that. We don't get to see a lot, but one thing that I can tell you from being able to observe Robertson during practice, on top of the fact of talking to players who are working with him and just players that aren't even in his positional group, but players that are getting to know him in the building and talking to their teammates who play defensive line, he is very hands-on, very hands-on. If anyone remembers the style of play he had, just the passion he had, just the passion that he played with, that's the exact same way he is out there on the practice field. Same exact way. So, look, I love Jimmy Lindsey. I thought he did a really nice job, especially from a recruiting standpoint. And continued thoughts and prayers to Jimmy, who's down in LSU, had a health scare earlier this month. I don't believe is with the team. So continued prayers with Jimmy Lindsey and his family. But I do believe Robertson is going to be able to bring a different level of intensity and play just because that's what he does. I mean, that's all he knows. That's the only speed he knows. So I'm excited to see what he's able to bring. I'm going to read one more, and then I'm going to move things over to our interview with On3's J.D. Baquel, which we taped a little bit earlier today. God Love Comics says, first play of the game, Rattler throws deep down the field to Harbor. Maybe not complete, but just to put the fear in UNC's secondary. I don't hate it. And even if it's not the first play, right? Let's say you want to run the football, just be able to get the offensive linemen, their feet underneath them a little bit. I would not be shocked to see South Carolina take some type of shot down the field, whether it be with Harbor, whether it be with Juice, whether it be with Marion Brown, which, by the way, I haven't had my predictions come out yet. That will come out tomorrow on Gamecock Central. I mean, for what it's worth, I said they were going to be 8-4 last year and that they would finish third in the conference despite beating Tennessee. Put that verbatim out there last year. Haven't released my stuff out yet this year. Still working through a couple things on what I'm going to ultimately decide on with the record and some of these picks. But I think Marion Brown is going to have a phenomenal year. I really do. When you think about what Dal Loggins wants to do with this offense, and I know it's crazy for me to say that because we haven't really seen it. No one's really seen it, really. But you get this sense that he's really going to use the entire field. It's not just going to be north and south. It's going to be east and west, using the entire field. And how many times last year, if any of you tuned in to our GC Live postgame shows, you heard Michael Scarnecchia talk about it. Why not throw some crossing routes out there? Why not do a slant? Why not use the middle of the field? South Carolina, for whatever reason, outside of probably the Tennessee game and the Clemson game, for a good portion of the season, at least against Power 5 teams, they didn't do that. They didn't take advantage of that. I expect that to change this year, and I expect AB to play a big role in that just because he has so much speed and some of the matchup nightmares that he creates because of his speed. And I think he plays bigger than what he really is. Because of that speed, though, I think he can really help South Carolina do a lot of good things on offense. Just getting a message here. Just want to make sure there's nothing crazy here. One last reminder before I turn things over to JD. Shane Beamer, Carolina calls tonight, Backstreet's Grill. going to start at 6 o'clock. You can listen live on 107.5 The Game. We'll have updates for you, though, on Gamecock Central. Turning things over, though, to JD. This was our interview from a little bit earlier today. Talked a lot about, obviously, this game, but then his perception about where this Gamecock program is right now, on top of the fact of what he thinks Spencer Rattler will look like this year. So listening to you guys, you're saying that there's no sound right now. Apologize for that. Try to see if we can figure that out. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see. Usually we have intern Joe here. I know. Intern Joe is good with dealing with this so that I can kind of roll with the punches while all that stuff's going on and we can get the things up here. Let's see. All right, bear with us for a second, everybody. How can we do this? All right, here's what we're going to do. I am going to just throw up a full screen real quick. And as I do that, I'm going to get this situated. And we will be back with the interview, hopefully, with JD Baquel. So stay with us, everybody. All right, guys, you could probably tell the audio isn't working, which is just phenomenal. So we're going to roll with the punches here. Hopefully get that up for you. So I'm going to try my best to be able to get that up for you guys as the show gets going, as you have that back feed in there. So apologize for that, guys. See if we can get the interview, though, up. And if not, we had that all recorded, and we'll throw that up for you on Gamecock Central. Let's continue, though, reading some of the comments that you guys have sent in. Bill Anderson asked about Jason Henry, who could be one of the linemen out there starting this weekend. Just haven't heard a ton about him, even though he is projected starter. I think the thing is, Bill, at least with what we were able to see during practice, and unfortunately the media, it's so limited as to what we can actually see. It wasn't anything that, stood out, but at the same time, too, when you're an offensive lineman, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, as we all know, when it comes to being an offensive lineman, if you're hearing someone's name more often than not, that's usually not a good thing. Now, of course, Nick Gargiulo, Vershawn Lee, that's a little bit different, right? But I think the point being is, with this offensive line as a whole, they've been working through so many different things, trying to figure out what that combination of starters is going to be, that unfortunately, with what we were able to see during, like I said, you get about 20, 22, 25 periods during the entire course of preseason during those 4 practices that were open to the media. It's hard to really see not just offensive linemen, but really the offense as a whole, as to what they look like, minus maybe Rattler and what he's throwing on, right? I mean, if they're doing some good on good, but it's such a short period of time that we don't have a real opportunity to see how the offensive linemen are doing. And we haven't really heard too much about him from other players, at least. And that's not saying that he won't have a good year. He won't be a starter this weekend. I mean, there's still oars, as we mentioned, on that depth chart. But I think South Carolina is going to try to figure out what they can do just to be able to, I don't want to say get by in this first game, but try to figure out what they can do so that they can get this offense that is very highly, people are just waiting to see what this offense is going to look like. I mean, it's kind of like Christmas, and you're trying to figure out when you're a kid, like, what's that big present going to be? You have an idea. You might have an idea, but what does it truly look like? And I feel like that's the best way to describe this offense. People are excited. People have an idea, but they don't truly know what it will look like. And I think with the offensive line, as I mentioned before, they have to give Rattler some time. They have to give Rattler time. If they can't give Rattler time, it could be a long day. It could be a long, long day. Over under, DK more yards than Lloyd in the first game, 42. I'm going to go over. And look, I thought when Marshawn Lloyd was healthy last year, I thought he did a lot of good things. But at the end of the day, he's no longer here. With DK, I think DK can surprise a lot of people. But again, kind of talking like with Rattler, what does it look like with the offensive line? Can the offensive line get things going? And that's one of the biggest concerns I have with this team heading into the first game of the year. Clemson smoked UNC in May in the ACC championship game. I'm sure USC is looking at that defensive template. Yes and no. I mean, it's kind of like anything in football, right? College, pro, you can even say high school. It's a copycat league. You're going to try to find things that a team did good against another team, what worked for them, what didn't work against them. The challenging part is it's week 1. Now, of course, with South Carolina, they have more unknown just because you have a new offensive coordinator, and they were probably having to watch tape of what Dal Loggins did in the NFL as an OC. On top of that, and I'm sure they're watching plenty of tape from Spencer Rattler from a year ago, and to carry on Joyner from that Duke's Mayo Bowl game. So when they're preparing for North Carolina, when they're preparing for South Carolina, North Carolina has to watch a lot. Now, you look at it from the other side, talking about North Carolina's offense. Yeah, I mean, you're going to watch what took place last year, but at the same time, too, it's last year. It's a little different when you're going week to week. I mean, how many times have we seen teams, whether it be college, whether it be pro, when they have a bye week, just that extra week, and they come out and they look totally different. They're able to cover up some of those blemishes that they may have had 2 previous weeks earlier. Now, here, 8 months? Whenever the last time it was that North Carolina played back in December, 8 going on 9 months. So you don't know how much of that will truly help. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be things that we see in this game from South Carolina's defense that will mimic what we saw last year in the ACC championship game. Craig says, "Congrats on your award, Mike. Is Mario Anderson? I win something? Is Mario Anderson an afterthought now? I don't hear anyone mentioning him anymore." I think the thing with Mario is there's still so much unknown about that running back room as a whole, right? Like, I feel like Juju McDowell is going to still be able to play a vital role in that running back room. We really haven't heard too much about Juju. We've heard from Juju. We've heard from him during preseason camp. We've heard a lot, obviously, from Dakereon Joyner. But outside of DK, we're not hearing a lot about the other running backs. I wouldn't take that as oh, man, I'd be worried about this. I think it's just truly they're figuring out what that rotation is going to look like, what everyone is going to ultimately bring to the table. Because when you look at DK, when you look at Juju, when you look at Mario Anderson, they all bring a little something different to the table. And that's not a bad thing, especially when you're talking about running backs. I'd rather have that than 3 guys that are all the same, right? Now, don't get me wrong. Obviously, the work ethic and all that kind of stuff, when you're talking about Dakereon Joyner, a character, that's a given. But from a skill set standpoint, it's like having, multiple pitches in your arsenal as a pitcher, right? Being able to throw a good breaking ball, being able to throw a good fastball. Then you got a changeup in there as well. That's what South Carolina is going to be looking to do when they use these running backs. Hunter says, "Has the game been sold out yet?" Not to my knowledge yet, Hunter. At least as of this morning, I don't believe it was. So if that's happened with the last couple of hours, that would be news to me. So I don't believe it is. But those neutral-sided games are so tricky, too. They're so tricky because you have X amount of tickets that will go to one school, then X amount of tickets that will go to the other. And then you still have, some tickets in the middle where you can have general public or just, people who are on either side still be able to attend. But those neutral-sided games, I think they're so tricky. I do feel like there will be more South Carolina fans than North Carolina fans, despite the fact the game being played in North Carolina. I think Gamecock fans travel extremely well. I think despite outside of the Duke's Mayo Bowl, that being a stadium that Gamecock fans aren't necessarily crazy about, I think because of that Duke's Mayo Bowl win back in December of 2021, it's brought back some joy, at least, about playing in that stadium. So, and the fact that it's the first game of the year, too, right? There's high expectations heading into this season. Year 3 of the Shane Beamer era. I think Gamecock fans are going to travel extremely, extremely well up there this weekend. We got Beamer is a step faster than AB. Any word on the NC transfer? I don't believe so at this point. Hunter says, let's see. And this is going down. I'm going through all the comments right now. That's ironic. Fulbright Jason, man, turn your lights on. You're sitting in the dark. I'm not sitting in the dark. Jason, you want to come over here and pay my electric bill? You can do that for me, buddy. Let's see. We need intern Joe. I know. Intern Joe. I'm excited for intern Joe's show on Sunday. He's off to a great start, though. I'm just messing with you, Jason. Well, we're trying to get a little bit more light in the background, kind of just a different setup than everything just shining. You get the stupid lights that will appear on the glass with the jerseys if you have the lights on. Let's see. Billy says, intern Mike, you are having technical issues. See if Joe is out of class and can help you. Yeah, I'm going to try to give it one more go. It's weird because we never have issues. We never have issues with being able to play the audio. So I don't know why. It's as simple as just clicking on the YouTube page and sharing the screen, so I don't know why the audio isn't playing. William goes, Drake May, QB, Drake May, running back. Yeah, I mean, he can do a little bit of everything. Michael says, does the defense need at least one turnover to win this game? Absolutely. No question about it. I mean, you go back to last season when South Carolina was able to force at least one turnover, the difference there was between the margin of wins and losses. And obviously, if they were able to force two turnovers, just the difference it made. So I think with South Carolina, there's no question that they have to force turnovers. And one thing, if we're able to listen to JD talk, if we can get the audio going, JD talks about the fact that one of the best things from a defensive standpoint, right? One of the best defenses for South Carolina this weekend could be their offense. And what he means by that is being able to have South Carolina stay on the field as long as they can. Well, what plays a role with that? Obviously, being able to, extend drives and being able to abstain them, but being able to force turnovers will help keep North Carolina off the field. I mean, that goes without saying. But being able to give Rattler, giving that offense the ball as much as they can, it will certainly help. Certainly help. So yes, forcing turnovers will be big. And I say special teams because I'm looking at the next question. Special teams, you don't put a 5-star on special teams. Well, you must be living under a rock, my man. I mean, have you not seen what? Have you not paid attention to what's gone on over the last 2 years, going on 3 years? They will play whoever on special teams, whoever they feel like will make an impact here. Don't play 5 stars. Oh, my goodness. I feel like I'm listening to people who have a fantasy football team. You don't do this, yeah. Big Red says, who makes a bigger impact on defense, Mo Kaba or DQ Smith? I think Mo Kaba will get back to being as close to the Mo Kaba as we know him to be, probably, I'd say, 3 games into the year. I still think he's working through a couple of things to get back to being as healthy as he can. But, and this is no slight against Mo Kaba, I've been very high. And if you've gone back and you've listened to any of the things that I've said over the last, 4 or 5 months, I think DQ Smith could have the breakout year on this defense. I truly do. And the reason why I say that is here's a guy that played quarterback in high school at Spring Valley, right? You're not playing at a lower level school. You're playing at a pretty big school, right? Spring Valley, they're playing some pretty good competition. He makes the move to defense last year. Not only does he make an impact on special teams right away, but then he's able to carve out a role on defense. And as we saw as the year went on, including the Gator Bowl at the end of the year, Smith was able to get better and better and better. Now, that's as a true freshman. That knowledge that he has from high school, as he's talked about with me before, he understands route patterns and route concepts just because he played quarterback. So being on the other side is kind of like looking at a mirror. When he's watching the offense and watching routes develop and watching the quarterback's eyes, he was able to pick up things fairly quickly last year. Now, that's just more so just because he has a good IQ, good football IQ. What happens when he has an extra year to be able to develop? What happens when he's able to continue to learn from Torian Gray and he's able to watch more film and get faster, stronger, right? All that kind of stuff that takes place in the offseason. Well, you could become a better football player. And the fact that he's working with one of the best defensive back coaches in the country in Torian Gray, I think it's only going to help him that much more. So that's why I think with DQ Smith, look, Nick Eamon-Worry, we know how talented he is. And I think he's going to have another great season. But I really think you're going to see a big, big, big jump this year from DQ Smith. And I'm very excited for it because Marcellus Dial, OD Fortune, those are two guys, as I mentioned, they're coming in. They have to replace the task of replacing Darius Rush and Cam Smith. That's not an easy task to ask anybody. But I feel like they're good enough where they're going to be able to do a good job. The safeties over the top, because you have talented safeties, it's going to help the secondary as a whole. But I really think DQ Smith is the one that's going to be able to benefit from it the most. Because teams are going to look at Nick Eamon-Worry. They're not going to want to throw his way. They're not going to want to run his way. That's why I think DQ Smith will really be able to benefit a lot from it this year. And yes, talking about North Carolina, Sidney Vergara will break out, help our run game and protection. I like Sidney. I really do. I liked everything that he said. I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago during a media availability. I like where his head's at. And again, it's not the challenging part is just being able to get those 5 guys on the offensive line to be able to develop a rapport quickly together. That's the challenging part. That's the challenging part. And that's why as we head into this first game of the season, we're talking about the offensive tackle positions, not knowing who the starting left tackle is, not knowing who the starting right tackle is. And perhaps tonight, as Shane Beamer gets ready to appear on Carolina Calls, which will start at 6 tonight at Backstreet's Grill, perhaps we'll find out who the starters are if Todd Ellis asks him that and if Beamer chooses to share that. But even going into this game, right, regardless of what the tackle situation's looking like and regardless of what the offensive line unit is looking like as a whole, I'm not going to be shocked if things change over the next couple weeks. I mean, you pray that that doesn't happen because that means good things are probably happening, right? I mean, why are you going to move something around if things are working out for you? But I'm not going to be shocked, say week 3, week 4, could be even week 2, that USC decides to make some tweaks on their offensive line. But hopefully that won't be the case. Mario Anderson showed off some scary athleticism with his breakdancing moves. I think with Mario, he's shifty, and obviously you're referring to the dance that he had before practice. I'd say that's practice 12 maybe. Looking at my schedule right now. I mean, it was probably about 3 weeks ago or so. He's quicker than I think some people will give him credit for. He has fairly decent hands. That was something that Montario Hardesty mentioned during the spring, that his hands have improved, and that was during the spring. We didn't hear as much about it during fall camp. But I think Mario Anderson, again, talking about just the different skill sets all 3 running backs have, Mario, if he can gain confidence, I think that's the biggest thing. If he can just gain confidence, how much he's used in week 1, we'll have to wait and see, right? I mean, this is a totally different offensive coordinator. If you go back during the Marcus Satterfield era, there were times where South Carolina, they would really only use like 2 running backs. Like when you really boiled it down, they really only used like 2 running backs each week. And occasionally they throw in a third one who would, maybe he'd have, I don't know, he'd be out there and be on passing situations, or, it could be a guy that had like a carry or 2, but they really didn't use 3 running backs. And that's not to say South Carolina is going to be divvying the things up at the point where everyone's going to get like 10 carries or more each week. I'm not saying that. But is Mario Anderson going to have an opportunity this weekend to be able to gain that confidence early on? I mean, we know what's on the other side of this game with Furman. But as far as week 1 is concerned, what is his workload going to look like? What is that workload going to look like? Are you going to give it to DK and Juju just because, number one, Juju has the experience? He has the most experience, of course, in the room. We're talking about being in the SEC and playing the running back position in the SEC. To Kerryon Joyner, of course, he's kind of been like a nomad, going from quarterback, going to receiver, but he at least has experience of playing in the SEC. He has experience of being in the backfield in some of those Wildcat packages, and of course, as a quarterback, but we haven't seen him as a running back, a true running back, the workhorse as a running back. So where does that factor Mario Anderson in? How many carries does Mario Anderson get? That's the question. I'm going to ask you guys that. How many touches out of the backfield do you believe Anderson will get this weekend? I would say probably about 10. 10. I could see 12. Just because unless Kerryon Joyner is just breaking loose and having all these big runs, or Juju, I think Mario will get in there. I think the challenging thing with Juju is Juju brings so much to the table, because even despite the fact that he's not the biggest dude in the world, which obviously limits him in terms of how many times you could probably run him between the tackles, he's done a great job of improving his pass blocking. And as Marcus Lattimore and we've talked about it many, many times before. What's the best way for a running back to prove that he belongs to stay on the field? Your pass blocking. It's very difficult for a coach to take you off the field if you can prove to them that you can block as a running back, especially pass blocking. So I think with Juju, he'll get a good amount of reps this game, probably more than he's ever gotten in a game, to be honest. But I think you'll see all three of those running backs get a good fair share of action on Saturday. Blake goes, I worry about Stone against the caliber quarterback this early on. Guy can move. Stone hasn't shown that he can yet. I got to see it. I totally get that, Blake. Again, going back to what we were talking about before, Stone's probably down about 12 pounds, 12-ish, 15-ish, between that 10 and 15 range from a year ago. You can see it in his body. You can see it in his face, but you can see it in his body. He's lost a lot of that baby fat that when you're coming out of high school and you get that year or two under your belt of working in a college weightlifting program, you can see that his body is transformed tremendously. And he's moving around a hell of a lot quicker than he was, say, a year ago. Now, what does that look like in a game, right? It's so much different on the practice field in comparison to when you're actually out there going up against especially a guy like this and Drake May that can move around and obviously can throw the football well. You know, I pick on Blanton with this one play in particular just because I know that he can take it. Not that I'm saying this is going to get relayed back to him, but if it was, you know, I'm sure he would agree. You know, there were times in that Vanderbilt game that when he was identifying which gap he was supposed to come down and fill, he was hesitant at time. He may have went to the wrong one. There was little things like that. And the reason I bring that up is he, despite the fact that he didn't play in like 50, 60, 70 plus snaps, the amount of snaps that he'll likely play this weekend, he gained a lot of experience last year. He gained a lot of experience. And while you can't truly prepare for a player of the caliber of Drake May, I think being able to experience some of those things his freshman season will help him out tremendously, not just in game one, but especially as the year goes on. So the big thing with Stone is just, look, trusting what you're seeing. Don't try to do more than your 1/11th. I mean, we've talked about it on the GC Live Talking Tuesday program, more so for defensive linemen. But sometimes your responsibility is to be the traffic cone. Sometimes your responsibility is to be the guy that takes on 2 blocks, or you're the guy that's not going to necessarily make the tackle. You're the traffic cone. It's okay to be the traffic cone sometimes. And it's not just Stone. You think of a guy like Pop Howard that's going to come in here. He's been with the program, obviously, dating back to the Gator Bowl practices last year. He has the SEC size. He has the SEC speed. But what does he look like in an actual game? And going back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this program, which is, what does it look like with some of these younger players, whether they make a big play or whether they give up a big play, whether they screw something up? How do they respond back? They need to flush it. They need to move on. They need to be able to bounce back and not get caught up on the highs and the lows that come with playing in a college football game. I think that's the big question mark, that when you have 10 either freshmen or true freshmen who are appearing on the 2 deep, on top of the fact that you have a plethora of sophomores who also appeared on the 2 deep. And then on top of all that, you have some transfers who have never played in the SEC. And granted, I get it, you're playing against an ACC team, but whether it be playing against SEC talent or playing just Power 5 football in general, they don't have that experience. What will that look like? I'm not super concerned about a guy like Nick Gargiulo. I think Gargiulo is going to be fine. I think a guy like Josh Simon will be fine. I mean, you want to talk about a tight end who can do a little bit of everything. That's a player who I'm very excited to see, right? It's not necessarily the running back. It's not necessarily the receiver. It's not even Trey Knox, who is going to get a lot of attention and has got a lot of attention, rightfully so. But what does it look like when Josh Simon's out there? Because he's proven in practice from what we've been able to see and from talking to people close to the program, he plays physical. He can also catch the ball. He can high point it. You saw that one clip in particular during practices. It was a one-on-one period, and Rattler just threw it up to him in the back of the end zone, and Simon was able to come down with it. What does it look like, though, in a game with some of these other players? But I'm excited to see Josh Simon out there. William goes, Sellers 3rd or 4th and 1. I'm interested to see how they use Sellers week 1, because I do feel like at some point, even if they decide to redshirt him, and I'm not saying they necessarily will, but they obviously could, you have that luxury, as we've mentioned before, of being able to play guys in at least 4 regular season games. Is this one of the games that you want to use Sellers if you feel comfortable enough with using him? Because if you do, you can still use him in 3 other games and still say, hey, you know what? Don't feel like we're using him enough, or we don't feel like it is in the best interest of not just him, but the program in the long haul to burn a year of eligibility for him. Again, I'm not saying that will happen. We could see Sellers being a guy that goes out there and maybe he gets 8-10 plays a game with packages. The tough part about it all, and I think this is something we'd all agree on, is the fact that you have a talented quarterback in Spencer Rattler. So anytime that you take Rattler out to put Sellers in, you're taking the ball out of what Gamecock fans, I'm sure, would agree on, even though the national perception about Rattler might be a little bit different. You're taking the ball out of the hands of one of the most talented quarterbacks in the country. And I know what you're saying, William. It's more so those short yardage situations, maybe the ones where you don't want Rattler to necessarily be in, right? Some of those pile-ups. We saw the documentary that just came out recently on Netflix. I'm sure many of you have seen it. Swamp Kings, Tim Tebow. That was something that he was known for. Came on in, short yardage situations, and picked up the first down. Is that something that Sellers will be doing in this game and throughout the course of the season? The Steel Curtain says he's shifty with some power as well. Talking about Mario Anderson. Yeah, look, Mario's got some wiggle to him. He's got some wiggle to him, but he's got some speed. He has speed. That's why it's like when you're talking about, even Nick Argiulo, but it's very difficult with an offensive lineman unless you're really paying attention to what he's doing play after play and you have an idea of what the blocking assignments are play after play. But Mario Anderson, Josh Simon, some of these transfers who are coming from smaller programs, what do they look like now that they're here? Right? What does Mario Anderson look like in the backfield for an SEC team? Because he has speed to him, but the speed at the Division II level for the Wolves of Newberry is going to be much different here. Now, I will say this. Having seen Newberry, having seen some of the speed that is down here when you're talking about the Division II programs in comparison to up north, even though Carlins Patel was able to figure it out fairly quickly when he came in 2 years ago and played nickel here in South Carolina, I'd say there's more speed down here for Division II in comparison to the speed up north in some of those conferences that you see in the New England region. And so I bring that up because, yes, it's still going to be a transition for Mario. It's still going to be one of those things where it's not going to be anything close to what he saw at Newberry, but I feel like the speed is not as far off in comparison to what Patel had to go through when he transferred in from Assumption. Craig Godwin says, May will throw us 2 on Saturday. 2 interceptions, I'm assuming that's what you meant. All right. Let's see. Frederick, good to see you on. It was his fraternity step. That's right, Frederick. I wanted to make sure I was correct. That's why I didn't put that out there when I tweeted the video out. And I thought Mario, his response was so perfect. And Frederick, you'll get a kick out of it if you hadn't seen it. But he said, I got that dog in me. He literally has that dog in him. And it's always neat to see players represented their fraternities. I learned more about it when I was in college. We didn't really have frats, but there were many teammates who joined different fraternities And they were very proud of it, and rightfully so. And Mario is certainly one of those guys, and that was neat to see. Bill says, "You know what makes Gamecock Central the best Gamecock content?" I'm assuming when the audio actually plays, Bill, is what you're saying. And I apologize that we haven't been able to get this JD audio up quite yet. I'm going to give it one more try. But you say, "We know what makes Gamecock Central content good? Listening to you, Chris, Wes, and Colin is like listening to a friend talk Gamecocks. Easy listening in the car, traveling each day." Well, Bill, I appreciate that. The only difference with me in comparison to those guys is, unfortunately, you're going to hear some R's get dropped, and that Boston accent will occasionally slip out, especially if I get irritated like I am right now with this audio not playing. So I appreciate everyone listening. We're going to try to extend this a little bit longer. We're going to try to get this JD audio to play, and that's the way we'll wrap up the show if it does. If not, well, we'll call it a show, and we will put this audio out there on Gamecock Central. Just a little disappointed that it's not playing, so I apologize for that. Typically, we have no issues with this. No issues. I don't know why this is happening today. So we'll see if we can get that fixed for you guys. I'm going to see if I can finagle a couple things. If I can change things up here with the audio, try to get something going so that we can get this to play. So we'll see what we can do here. See if we unplug this. Okay. Gonna try to unplug a few things, guys. See if we can get this JD interview playing properly. Blake says, "I thought 3 to 5 would be good, mostly short yardage." Let's see. Hot takes of the week. Gamecocks win by 20. Woo! TCU covers, and LSU dominates Florida State. I think LSU, not to get too sidetracked because I want to continue to stick with the Gamecocks, but there's so many good football games this weekend. I mean, it starts tonight too. You got a couple SEC teams playing. Florida, of course, playing Utah. But LSU, I expect them to take care of Florida State, especially after what happened last year, coming up as short as they did, and what a phenomenal game that was last season. But maybe this is a hot take. I don't know. I mean, Colin's been giving me a hard time about it. Maybe I'm just drinking the Kool-Aid. I really think Colorado's going to surprise some people. I think they'll at least go 6-6 this year. I know it would be absolutely incredible if they did, simply for the fact that this roster, I mean, it's like a little kid just decided to create a team, in the sense that you don't even know who half the guys are anymore over there. But I mean, it's not an easy task to play TCU, but I'm gonna go with the crazy pick and say that Colorado will upset TCU this weekend. I know there's probably a lot of you listening to me saying, "Mike, you are on something right now," but no, I'm telling you, that'd be a hell of a way to start the coach prime era in Colorado, huh? Still Curtin goes, "Juju is not meant to be running inside zone. Getting him on the outside, especially outside zone, and throwing him the ball is important. No question. I think you need to be able to mix him up, though, a little bit, and being able to run between the tackles. He doesn't have to run between the tackles, I'd say, more than, 8 times a game. But continuing to keep teams honest. And when I say running between the tackles 8 times a game, sometimes that's even just a zone read or an RPO, and the ball doesn't necessarily go to him, but he's still taking those hits as if he has the ball going up through the middle. That's what I mean by that. It's Me says, "What's the best place to go eat at before a home game? Coming in for the Furman game and looking for the best place for lunch." I mean, I'm a big fan of Village Idiot Pizza. You can't go wrong if you want to come down and tailgate all day long. Bojangles is next to the stadium. Everything's pretty much both sides, though, on game day. It all depends how quickly you want to get down here, because it is going to be an absolute zoo. I mean, even though it's Furman, there's going to be a big crowd. I mean, it's the first home game of the year. So I say that because, I mean, you got Jay's Corner, which is across from the fairgrounds. That's another place that's fairly close to the stadium. I wish there was a little bit more. But Backstreet Grill is another good spot. I mean, if you want to shell out some money, Hall's is a good spot. Market on Main, Cantina, all that area is good stuff. That's what I would say about that. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit. Ryan says, Since there is discussion on the forum, do you as an individual truly believe that Satterfield called the last 3 games in the same role as he did in the first 3/4 of the season? Yes, I do. I do. And I think that notion is kind of crazy that we're still here. And I'm not saying this necessarily about you, Ryan, but that there's some people that still have like this tinfoil hat conspiracy like feel to it where it's just like they can't wrap their head around the fact that he was calling the plays. I think what happened more than anything is that Beamer kind of said, hey, look, we have to simplify things. We have to do this. Okay. I mean, there were stories coming out about South Carolina in walkthroughs and how they're going through plays and they have so many friggin' plays. I mean, there was a story about it out in Nebraska, maybe 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago now at this point, and how they felt like they were behind on where they needed to be because the playbook is just so extensive. So look, I do feel like Satterfield knows what he's doing as far as X's and O's. He has a good grasp of running he has a good grasp of what an offense is supposed to look like, but running it, that's a different thing. And I felt like, unfortunately for South Carolina, they ran into issues last year where it was just trying to get too cute, trying to force things, trying to make things happen where, if you're trying to bake a cake, if you don't have the ingredients to bake a cake, you're not going to be able to bake a cake that day, right? You wake up in the morning, you're like, you know what? I'm feeling like some pancakes today. Well, if you don't have the ingredients for pancakes, getting a couple Fruit Loops and mix it in with some flour, that's not necessarily going to make you pancakes. And I felt like that was the issue with South Carolina last year from an offensive standpoint, is that Satterfield wanted to force things to happen because he wanted to run X, Y, Z. But based on the skill set they had, based on the injuries they went through, based on the strengths more than anything of the team, it just didn't make sense to do that. And that's why towards the end of the season, it felt like it was hey, you know what? Screw it. Let's just go out there and play. Let's just go out there and play. Let's let our playmakers make plays. And as we saw, we all know what happened. Big Red says, will that or designation go away a few games into the season? Does this game solidify some positions? It will. You'll probably see less ors. But at the same time, too, I wouldn't be shocked to see ors remain throughout the majority of the season. And the reason I say that is a couple things. One, you're trying to keep players honest, right? Whether they're the starter or the guy behind them, you don't want them to mentally check out completely. And there's some positions that, again, you see it more so on special teams, and those special teams depth charts don't come out. I know Limbo was saying that, if you saw the special teams depth chart in week 1, it's not going to look the same for the Clemson game, whether that be on kickoff, whether it be that on punt rush, whatever the case may be. But the same could be said on offense and defense. So I think you'll see some of those ors go away. The big question mark, though, to me is the linemen. What does the O-line look like? Do the 5 guys that are starting this game, do they all solidify their spot for next week? Is there some type of weak link this week? Which, as we mentioned before, that's the last thing that Spencer Rattler needs. You give Spencer Rattler time this weekend, I feel like he's going to be able to make some things happen. If you don't, this could be a long game. This could be a long, long game because North Carolina is going to get theirs. They're going to. You have too talented. The quarterback situation over there, they're too talented not to get some points. They're going to score points. I'm not saying that this will necessarily be a shootout where both teams are scoring 40-plus points. I think my prediction I put out today was 34-27 South Carolina. I mean, these are two teams that have really good special teams as well. Really good special teams. And as Lumbo mentioned yesterday in his press conference, since Mac Brown was hired at North Carolina, he's been paying attention a lot as to what the Tar Heels have been doing on a special teams basis year to year. So that's a good special teams unit. They got speed, they got talent, they got experience. I think it's going to be tricky to pull a fast one on. I'm not saying that Lembo isn't capable of doing it, but special teams is going to be interesting to pay attention to this weekend because you got 2 really good units. Barry says, Wouldn't Sellers be a good practice quarterback to represent what May can do? So it's interesting you brought this up, Barry, because earlier in the week, Colin Taylor asked one of the players that, I think it may have been DQ Smith, and asked him who was representing Drake May on the scout team at quarterback. And DQ's answer was they were rotating. So I don't know necessarily who was playing who. You think from an accuracy standpoint, you think from an arm strength standpoint, you're going to get the best look when it comes to going up against Spencer Rattler, when you're doing good on good. As far as being able to get some type of dual threat look, yeah, I mean, Sellers, to me, it makes the most sense. So I'm sure they were able to mix some things up in there, but I wouldn't be shocked if Sellers was giving them a look as well. Hip Hop Madness 803 goes, TCU going to smash the Buffs. Is that what people are saying when they're saying wow? With my belief that Buffalo is going to pull off the upset of TCU. Craig goes, who's going to cover all those Florida State receivers? Craig, honestly, with that game, I could see it being just an absolute shootout. I could see it being a shootout. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is when it comes to, and I'm biased just because of with Brian Kelly and my ties to him. Wherever he goes, he finds a way to win. And to be as close as they were last year in week 1 and to come up short, I think it's going to motivate them. William goes, wow. Wow, Mike. David, wow. Dion installed himself as Colorado's punt returner. Oof. I don't know if he's going to be able to move around at all over there. Hate to see that happen over to Dion. Regardless, I'm sure there's some people that aren't necessarily too fond of primetime, but hate seeing all the health stuff that he's been going through. Steel Curtain says, if they do win, social media is going to have a field day roasting TCU. Oh, no question. Not just TCU. They're going to be roasting a lot of the media, national media people. I don't know what it is. I mean, that conference itself isn't that great. And I know TCU isn't a conference game, but it would obviously be, I mean, just being able to get to 6-6 going to a bowl game, that would be, especially with the fact that the turnover on that roster, that would be probably one of the greatest turnarounds in college football history. But I don't know. I mean, they have that game against TCU, and I told you, I'm going with the crazy picking Colorado, but even if they lose to TCU and they're able to just show some fight, I think they're going to earn the respect of a lot of people after that game. So I'm interested just to watch it and to see what they get. I mean, you want to talk about unknowns. I mean, my goodness. Imagine going into this game against North Carolina and having the roster turnover that Colorado has. My goodness. Oof. Marcus Satterfield got too many plays. He just couldn't find the plays to run. Yep, that's Hip Hop Madness 803. I agree on that. You said you feel sorry for Zeb. I feel bad that Zeb's not back here this year. I wish Zeb was still here. God Love Comics says, totally agree. Sack called those games, plus Lloyd decided to sit out the last 3 games so that he could just, by him sitting out, allowed Spencer to cut loose. Yep. Craig goes 33-27. Steve goes, do you think Clayton White will be more aggressive on defense? Aggressive, I'm assuming you mean just like with the blitzes. And I think it all just comes down to how quickly this defense can pick things up. Now, as far as just week 1, I think you're going to see them try to disguise things more than anything pre-snap. And the reason I say that is with having such young linebackers, and there's going to be young players at other positions too, I feel like they're going to try to simplify things. Because what happens in college football, throughout the course of the season, you're throwing more on the plate of a player, right? Like week 1, week 2, you're throwing more. Because you're going up against North Carolina, because you're playing a Power 5 team, you have to be ready the best you can, knowing that you can't necessarily just ease in. So I'm sure they've thrown a lot on the plate to these players. But at the same time, too, again, because you do have, I think it's six players on defense that are either freshmen or redshirted freshmen that appeared on the 2 deep. You have to be prepared for that. What does that look like when those young players are out there on the field? Are they going to be able to make those adjustments the way that you hope that they can? All right, guys, I'm going to do this one more time. I'm going to try to get this to play with JD. I appreciate everyone bearing with us. If you missed any of our show, you can go back, and we're going to have this up on the Gamecock Central YouTube page. We'll also have it posted on the Gamecock Central podcast platform. This is a long show, and if this JD interview runs, we'll be looking at a 2-hour show. But then again, it's opening weekend, so I think people enjoy listening and talking football, so we'll never apologize for that. See if we can play. Here's what we're going to do. I can't do that either. I was going to say we'll play another press conference from earlier in the week, but we can't get the audio to play. What I'm going to do is as I'm getting that situated, just so that there's something that you guys can listen to. This is from last year. Patrick Davis performing his song Big Ol' Cock at the Gamecock Central kickoff party. As that plays, though, I am going to see if we can get this JD interview up. So I appreciate everyone bearing with us. And fingers crossed the audio will play. So stay with us.
Oh, what else can I say? I'm just a big old cock. Well, you know I come from a long line of cocks just like me, who never stop believing despite our history. Cause though there's been heartbreak and oh so many tears, I know one day I won't have to say wait until next year. Cause I watched every quarter of 2010, from the beat down of Bama to Atlanta's bitter end. And I've cheered for Alshon Jeffrey, Melvin Ingram and Connor Shaw, and Jadeveon and Marcus were the best I ever saw. Yeah, and I hate them Georgia Bulldogs, Florida Gators, and Rocky Top. Oh, what else can I say? I'm just a big old cock. Yes, and when I die, I have just one request. So if you could, would you promise me this? These boys can still kick the SEC's ass right now. I play quarterback probably, right? I just hand you the ball. I just hand you the ball every time. I've got 1 year of eligibility left, guys, in case you need me. All right, boys and girls, this is the emotional part of the song. If something happens to me between now and the last weekend in November, I want y'all to throw me in the cooler at Steel Hands and bring me out on that Saturday when we're going to kick Clemson's ass. And we're going to have one hell of a party. We're going to have Ryan's going to be there, Corey's going to be there, Eric. Oh, that's Brian. Oh, he was good. Yeah. Hey, Brian Maddox right there. All right, so listen, boys and girls. We're going to have a hell of a tailgate party if that's where, and even if I don't die, we're still going to do it, okay? And the Midnight Choir is going to be there. And this is how it's going to go down. Coach Beamer's going to show up too. Who else is here? Any more Gamecocks in the house? Any more former Gamecocks still here? Hey, I will tell you this. Tanny Hill and I text. You know, he got in a wreck a week or two ago. He said he's got some tests they're doing on him, but we all got to wish Tanny Hill well tonight, all right? So let's have a little moment of silence for Steve. Hold on, come on. And now give him a big Go Cox. Come on. Because who doesn't love a mullet on a big, quarterback?
All right. We'll see if this plays. Let me know, guys. Keep me posted in the comments if the audio's working. All right, JD. Week 1 is finally here. Let's start with the big question, though. Big picture, and then we'll work back to this week. When you talk about South Carolina, what do you envision this season looking like for Shane Beamer as he heads into year 3?
I think it's all about setting the floor, because the last couple of years have been, not to take Shane Beamer's words and say they don't want to be a phenomenal story, but like that's how people viewed them nationally, was okay, they had 2 top 10 wins to finish the year, and they are this, like, whether they want it to be or not, this great story in college football. But that's not like what South Carolina wants to be going forward. I mean, I think a lot of people that actually watched South Carolina last year, understand that's not just the reality. It wasn't just a thing where they were this like flash in the pan. Like, there's a lot of really good pieces on that football team. I think Shane Beamer is one of the best coaches in the country, in my humble opinion, with what he's done with that team in a very short period of time. So I think this year it's about maybe re-emphasizing, hey, yes, last year was fun, but like this is who we are. This is what we're going to be going forward under Shane Beamer. And we've seen some juice already from them on the recruiting trail with what they've done already in the 2024 cycle. And if they're able to put some more proof of concept out there on the field, like, that whole operation is just going to explode. So to put it simply, I think it's about establishing, again, the floor and the identity of what a Shane Beamer South Carolina football team is going to be now here in year 3.
From a perception standpoint, from a national perception, because it's easy for us being here in Columbia. We see the team every day. And as I told some fans, because they get all upset, right? They get upset with preseason rankings. And I try to tell them all the time, preseason rankings are like being named prom queen back in high school, but you're in your 30s and you're putting that still on your resume. Like, yeah, at the time, people are going to talk about you for a couple weeks, but where do you go from there? I mean, that's how I view preseason rankings. But with that being said, I do feel like there is this stigma with South Carolina that it might be unfair to Beamer and some of the players that are associated with the program now that weren't here in the past, where they take a step forward and everyone's just waiting for them to take 2 steps back. Do you feel like there is this stigma with this program? Because year 3, even though I feel like Shane Beamer's where he's at right now from a recruiting standpoint, they are much further along in comparison to Will Muschamp and where that program was. Do you feel like this program, though, needs to prove to people having that consistency before they get that respect year in and year out that Gamecock fans are hoping to be able to have heading into this season that they don't probably have quite yet?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. And I think a lot of it, too, has to do with what they're surrounded by. Because you're looking over to your left and there's Tennessee, you're looking to your right and there's Georgia and there's Alabama, and like just what the SEC is as a whole, with how difficult it is to win games in that conference. Like, if we copy and paste South Carolina's 2 top 10 wins to end last year and put them in the Big 12, put them in the Pac-12, like, we're talking about South Carolina and what they could do at the end of this coming season very, very differently. But because we're grading them on the curve of, oh, well, they're still probably, quote unquote, middle of the pack SEC team, like, that's the kind of treatment they're getting. So I think the context with South Carolina is absolutely crucial when we're evaluating them. And there's a part of it that's fair. Like, hey, yes, we need to see more, because that's just the way that this sport works. Like, you do good things over a sustained period of time, there's a level of trust that gets built in there. That's why Alabama's talked about the way they're talked about, with 125th in the country returning production. Like, they have nobody coming back, but we trust Nick Saban. We trust how he's recruited. We trust what Alabama's been in the past, just overall. And so with the consistency there, that's why there's that trust built in for a school like Alabama. And that's what I think South Carolina is laying down right now with Shane Beamer.
You don't know intern Joe, but obviously our Gamecock Central people do. I asked intern Joe this question earlier in the week, and I'm going to ask you this. When you look at this matchup against North Carolina, what's one of the more intriguing things that you're looking at, right? It could be a storyline. It could be a position, could be a positional battle, right? It might not even necessarily be direct. It could be quarterback versus quarterback. What grabs your attention the most, though, in this matchup?
I think just what this game could do for them defensively, should you slow down or stop a guy like Drake May? Because that's kind of been the talking point all season with, yes, Spencer Rattler, they finished the year so hot, Juice Wells, Shane Beamer, but then like you look at the defensive side of the thing on the box score and you're like, hey, is that going to be the Achilles heel? Is that the reason why we don't get to where we can go to because the defense has issues? And just if they were to do what, that they could do this coming Saturday against Drake May, like the feather in your cap, the pep in your step, like the strut in your walk, whatever kind of verbiage you want to put to it, that would give to that defense like, hey, I'm looking at myself differently in the mirror if we slow down one of, if not the best quarterback in the country in Drake May. So I think that could just do wonders for their confidence. And in terms of trajectory the rest of the season, like, you're not playing too many better than Drake May on your schedule if you're South Carolina.
Yeah, and I get it that Gamecock fans, for 2 reasons. One, they're probably sick and tired of hearing about Drake May. And on top of that, there's kind of been this perception that maybe Spencer Rattler isn't getting as enough attention heading into this season, or especially into this game, right? And maybe it's because there was that small window of success last year in comparison to maybe the whole body of work. And I felt like Rattler had some pretty good games throughout the season. It just wasn't as consistent as what we saw towards the end of the year. I say all of that because kind of taking a peek over the fence, talking about North Carolina, what is it about Drake May that could give Gamecock defenders fits this weekend, and why is he being talked about as much as he is heading into this season?
Well, there's the obvious part of like he threw for, I think it was somewhere in the range of 4,000 yards last year. Like the statistical piece of it is obviously real, and there's the proof of concept. I think the thing that worries me the most if I'm a Gamecock fan is what happens after that first play ends and he breaks contain and he gets to use his legs. And I use that verbiage because you could have the perfect play dialed up. We have the right blitz, we got the right coverage, we got everything to where South Carolina is going to win this play. However, we miss on the blitz. Drake May makes one 6-inch movement up in the pocket, and we miss. And then that play is over. Now we're on to a brand new play, and a quarterback with his physical abilities being able to run the football. Like that's what I like to call like a game plan breaker. A quarterback's legs can break your game plan because you just can't account for it when that scramble drill starts. So you do as much during the week to prep for it and to stay with receivers. But that's the thing that worries me is how much of a game plan breaker are Drake May's legs when we have the right play dialed up defensively.
And I'm glad you brought that up because defensive coordinator Clayton White, he was mentioning that just the other day, just from looking back to last season. If you look at South Carolina, they allowed 198 yards rushing per game. That was 14th worst in the country. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were either in the backfield and they just couldn't finish tackles, or they broke contain and they weren't able to keep the quarterback in the pocket. So going up against a guy who is a dual threat, as good as you'll see all season, it will certainly put South Carolina to the test early on. Talk about the other side of the ball, though, offensively for South Carolina. And I think you're a perfect person to talk to about this. There's so many storylines, right? We could talk about the fact that you have a new offensive coordinator. You could talk about the fact that this offensive line, you don't know what you're going to get out of them. Spencer Rattler, of course, being back. But one of the more intriguing storylines, I think, for a lot of Gamecock fans is the fact that this running back room, your running back going into this game, your starting running back is a former wide receiver. And I think you are a perfect person to talk to about this. Now, granted, I don't know how many Wildcat packages were drawn up, and I know you didn't start your college career as a quarterback, but what I'm trying to get at is, can you give people just a little bit of knowledge as to when you made the move from wide receiver to running back, how that experience of playing on the perimeter could help you at all when you're behind the line of scrimmage? Now, again, DK played some quarterback, so he's used to being back there, but making that move from receiver over to running back, I think there's a lot of people that are excited, but at the same time, too, they're like, oh, boy, I don't know what to expect.
Yeah, and I think the difference between those positions is that there's such a definitive difference, obviously, with what you do when you get the ball in your hands. But I think the interesting thing to watch for South Carolina is, okay, how much do we get him the ball in space? Like reading blocks between the tackles is very different than, hey, run a slant, check out the leverage, get open, get upfield. Now, it's the same when you get the ball in your hands and you're in space, but the thing to watch is, okay, is he patient when we call power called? Is he patient when we have inside zone? He's watching that defensive lineman to figure out which way he's supposed to go. So I think that's the biggest adjustment, is figuring out how to be patient reading blocks between the tackles. But going back to what I was saying, I mean, I fully expect Dow Loggins to put Joyner in position to be successful, which is letting him work in space. Like, hey, let's get him the ball on the edge where he can use his speed, make one cut and go, like we would do if we were throwing him a bubble route or whatever it ended up being. So I think you'll see a lot of perimeter attacks for him, but I'm curious to see as the season goes on, when it comes to those between the tackle runs, Mike, what he ends up looking like and how patient he is with letting it set up. Because it's very different, obviously, as a receiver, and you know this, having played college ball yourself. Like when you get the ball in your hands out on the perimeter, they don't want you to dance. They want you to get north and south. Let's get some yards. Like, hey, don't do this whole half step in, juking and jiving. Whereas a running back, like I was saying, it is, hey, don't be too quick now. You got to let this block set up. You got some big boys up there. They're going to help you, but you got to make sure you give them time to help you. So watching that one for sure.
Moving over to Rattler, and I know you've talked a lot about Rattler this offseason.
Sure.
And you're probably giving him more recognition than a lot of people from a national standpoint. So go give JD a follow if you haven't, and be sure to tune into him on his show, The Hard Count, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays during the football season at 11 a.m. Eastern. With Rattler, what do you expect to see out of him on Saturday, right? Again, there's so many unknowns about this offense that could be a difficult question to answer. But assuming that the offensive line keeps them upright, the play calling isn't anything too crazy, and they're able to make the most out of it, as Dal Logan said the other day, when you're in the SEC or coaching in the NFL, there's no such thing as a honeymoon phase. So he doesn't even believe that there's a honeymoon phase. What do you expect from Rattler on Saturday?
I think we're probably in the minority here, Mike. Is there that question of, could we see Spencer Rattler look like he did the first part of last year and have trouble taking care of the football? Like, sure, that possibility, I'm sure, is somewhere out there in the realm of results. The thing that is encouraging to me, and this is based on the intel from the what y'all have been doing at Gamecock Central, is absolutely knocking it out of the park. The way they talk about the offense being more streamlined for them as a whole, and having there just be a smaller menu, being able to do more simplistic things great, as opposed to, hey, we got a lot of options, let's do them all good. That just makes this, again, having played football yourself, like, there is such a peace of mind required to play the quarterback position effectively, and I think simple equals peace of mind for him. So when it comes to what I expect from him against North Carolina, like, I think we're going to see a much more mistake-free Spencer Rattler. I think we'll see a much more confident Spencer Rattler, because there were times last year where you're like, what is he seeing there? Why is he putting the ball in that position? Why are we taking a chance there? And I think a lot of it is just like feeling frantic, trying to play catch up, where I don't expect that with this new system with Dow Logan. So a lot of it's talk, obviously, at this point, but there is no question about, can he make the throws? Is he able to physically accomplish what you want him to do? It's a matter of, okay, can we put him in position to succeed? So streamlining things and making it simple for him, I think we'll see, like I said, a relatively clean game from a turnover standpoint, which I know South Carolina fans would be very excited to see.
How much does that truly help, though? Because we hear this so much, and I think there's a portion of this fan base that hears that, and they're kind of looking at it as, oh, that was just an excuse from last year. And I think there's a lot of people that just weren't sold on what Marcus Satterfield was trying to do as an offensive coordinator. But I also think there's a portion of this fan base that hears that, and they're just like, oh, that's an excuse. It's easy, right? The OC from last year, he's not here. Having played in multiple offenses through your college career, how much can simplifying things truly make a difference? It sounds like as soon as you say, oh, simplify, oh, that's easy. But how much does that make a difference if you are a player like Spencer Rattler, Juice Wells, the talent that they have on offense that can just go out there and just play?
And I think you just said it. Like, it can help as much as they're allowed to just play. Like, when you're thinking about, what do I have to do on this play? What's my assignment? Am I doing the right thing? I hope I don't get yelled at. I hope I don't get pulled. I hope we don't make a mistake here after an interception. Like, as long as all of that is not in your frame of mind, it kind of clears the windshield for you a little bit, and you're able to just go out and play football. And so like, a lot of it definitely is cliche, play fast, play free, all that. And I think it's cliche for a reason. So, I mean, getting back to your question as to, how much does that really impact them? I think a lot of that then goes to, okay, well, what do we have around Spencer Rattler, like you alluded to at the top of this thing? Are we protecting him? Do we have some resemblance of a run game to where North Carolina can't just key on Juice Wells in the pass game and get the Trey Knox? So I think it will help them, one, as much as they're able to play free, and two, as much as they're able to have things around Spencer Rattler and those guys to complement them.
There was a little exercise, and we were talking about this before I hopped on. Here's the exercise. We're gonna play a little yes, no, throw a maybe in there too. Okay?
Love it.
Because maybe you're looking at it and you're like, well, I don't want to say yes, but I'm not completely on the no. So I'll throw a maybe in there. Okay. Here's where I'm going with this. Heading into this season, do you feel like there is less pressure on Spencer Rattler in comparison to a year ago?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Heading into this season, do you feel like there is less of a chip on his shoulder in comparison to a year ago?
Man, I feel like I'm on the stand right now. No.
I know, right?
No, Your Honor.
With Caleb Williams, is Caleb Williams a good football player?
Yes. 100%.
Is Caleb Williams a great football player?
Maybe best in the country. Best in the country, according to most
Has Caleb Williams lived up to the hype surrounding him so far coming out of high school?
It would be difficult to argue no, Your Honor.
So where I'm going with all of this is, do you feel like that heading into last season, based on some of the things that you've said, I'm using your words against you now, your yes, no's and all that.
Yeah.
Do you feel like because there was this thing where, hey, wait, Caleb Williams replaced this guy at Oklahoma. Man, Spencer Rattler, and I know you didn't say this, Spencer Rattler must stink. Spencer Rattler must not be that good. Well, what did Caleb Williams do? Caleb Williams goes to Southern Cal. He wins a Heisman. Is it possible that Rattler came in here last year feeling the pressure of, I have to prove people wrong? Caleb Williams goes out there and wins the Heisman. In my opinion, indirectly, that should take more pressure off Rattler this year. I know people aren't really talking about that, but my whole point is, obviously, he has to go out there and perform. Is it crazy, though, that some people, and I'm not saying everyone's saying like this guy stinks, but there's a lot of things like, oh, this guy's overrated. Is it crazy, though, that some people quickly forget that Rattler was replaced by an absolute bona fide stud? And if anyone was paying attention to Caleb Williams coming out of high school, they would have known that. But the fact that he won the Heisman Trophy last year, it only solidified that. So my point being is, with Rattler this season, does that help out at all? And again, I'm not saying he's thinking about this stuff, but do you think indirectly it takes some of that pressure off him?
I think it should. I think it should, to your point, because if you have anybody short of Drake May on your football team starting ahead of Caleb Williams, you probably have the wrong guy starting at quarterback. And just like you said, it's not a knock on Spencer Rattler that the best player in college football ended up becoming that guy as a freshman and took the job. Like, yeah, we can all, I think, see now with the dust settled. Yeah, he's probably a generational talent. Probably not many like him coming through college football anytime soon. So if I'm Spencer Rattler, I don't know if he's thinking about it that way, but I think indirectly there's a lot more of his story that has some blanks filled in, where like the context is so crucial for him because, like you said, the headline reads Spencer Rattler benched against Texas. You're like, well, guess that's it for him. I think that the other thing that follows him is how high the expectations were around him heading into that season, which I don't know if those are totally fair to put on anybody, but we were saying he's #1 pick, saying he's going to win the Heisman Trophy and all that. And like, that was still with a pretty limited sample size. So I think some of it too can fall back and say, well, who was really wrong, Spencer Rattler or us that put these expectations on him before we had enough to really work with? He had some great moments, right? I don't want to take anything away from what he did that season at Oklahoma where they beat Florida in that New Year's Six bowl game and all that. But even so, it's like, well, Spencer Rattler was Spencer Rattler the whole time, and he struggled at Oklahoma the next year, but he was still throwing the football to the team that year. But there were still things we could read where it's like there's still a lot of bad Spencer Rattler out there, but people in the media just crowned him right away and said, yep, that's the guy. Give him the keys to, whatever NFL organization he wants after this year's done. So I think we got to look in the mirror a little bit as a media and say, well, hey, was Spencer Rattler off base or were we off base trying to crown this kid after one season?
And no one is saying that he doesn't deserve blame at times for last season.
Sure.
I mean, it happens, especially if you're the quarterback. If you're the quarterback, it comes with the territory, just like being the head coach. But with Rattler having a year under his belt, and you've gone through this before, you've transferred schools, that comfortability. I don't know how much you've paid attention to some of the press conferences that have come out and just seen his demeanor, especially this past week. I mean, good Lord, he was as locked in as I've ever seen him. How much of a difference does that make? I mean, it seems obvious, but going through that yourself, being around a program at second year in comparison to just walking in, how much does that help a player?
I mean, it's worlds different. It's worlds different. And not just because of what happens from a football perspective. Like, obviously, you get more comfortable in the locker room and you get more comfortable with your coaching staff. And there's a lot of talk about the new OC and all that. But I mean, even just from like a day-to-day standpoint, like knowing where you're getting lunch at, knowing where your classes are, knowing, where you're living, knowing the area, like having to just eliminate so many external things that have nothing to do with football, but ultimately impact your frame of mind when you play football. Like, I think that means something. Now, I'm not saying where Spencer Rattler goes to lunch and his familiarity with that is going to make him a better football player, but I am saying that I think him being comfortable in a new place as opposed to last year just being, supposed to be the savior for South Carolina, supposed to do all these things and all these expectations, like to have that dialed back and to be settled in now and to be the guy at his new place and have it not be new anymore, I think that could do wonders for your confidence, and it should do wonders for your confidence.
I don't know if you've seen it with all the NIL deals going on. He's driving a G-Wagon now. Does that make things a little bit more comfortable too, you think?
It doesn't hurt. Doesn't hurt, that's for sure.
Fill in the blank for me, JD, as we wrap things up. Again, JD Baquel from On3 joining us today. If you haven't listened to the Hard Count, be sure to tune in over on the On3 Network. Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern. In order for South Carolina to win this game this weekend, they have to do blank.
It sounds simplistic. They have to limit broken plays for Drake May. And on top of that, they have to extend drives and take care of, I don't want to say take care of the football because everyone's going to say that. They have to be able to have some semblance of a run game, because we talked about it a little bit in our preview. Like, the best defense in this game may be to keep Drake May on the sideline, holding the bottle of Gatorade and watching the South Carolina offense just drive down the field with 9-10 play drives. So I think that, paired with what I said at the top of this, with limiting the explosive plays in broken format, like when he gets out of the pocket and you're trying to stick to your receiver downfield, like let's have as few plays of that as possible. Let's have as few plays where you have the announcer saying, and May breaks contain, looking downfield, still going. Like, if that's happening, bad things are probably happening for South Carolina, because that gives them more time to get open downfield. So winning the first play and then extending drives sounds simple, but Mike, I think that's the key to victory there.
And you've mentioned this before, just how much you enjoy watching Shane Beamer from afar, and how if you had an extra year of eligibility, you'd love to run down there on kickoff. There will be players. Our coworker Wes Mitchell put this out today on Gamecock Central. There'll be prospects that will be in attendance. Now, the NCAA rules when it comes to recruiting and neutral sided games, it's so weird. It's like, okay, we can give them tickets. They can't be contacted by any of our recruiting people. It's kind of like, they're there, but you're not saying anything. It's very weird. I didn't really know that. I read up on it a little bit more this morning, so I'm kind of just paraphrasing. I'm probably not doing a great explanation of explaining everything. But the point being is, you're going to have players there, and not just for this recruiting class who haven't committed, some are, but for 2025, 2026. And South Carolina and North Carolina, look, they're very similar when it comes to the talent that they're recruiting. There's been some guys that South Carolina has been able to land that North Carolina has been going after. There's been guys recently that North Carolina has been targeting, and they've been able to land that South Carolina is going after. I'm a believer, going back to when I covered Ole Miss, when Hugh Freeze said this about Ole Miss, Mississippi State, that one game doesn't determine recruiting. However, South Carolina beat North Carolina last time. It helps out a lot when you're beating said team, consistently. How much do you think this game can make a difference for South Carolina if they're able to beat their border state rival?
I think it's another solid brick to lay down. And it's another thing that you can package and take to recruits and say, you're down between these two schools, you're down between us and the Tar Heels. Okay, well, you decide. You saw the game. We don't have to really talk too much about it. You saw what we did on the field there. It's your call. But men lie, women lie. You're hearing a lot of things from different coaches. That's not going to lie to you, what you just saw on the field. And newsflash for you, you see who else is committed in our class. You see the way this thing is going. You're seeing our record the last couple of years. Like, this thing is trending the right way. So I think just being able to have something that speaks for itself in a world of high school recruiting where everybody and anybody is trying to get in these kids' ears and tell them something, whether it's real or not, tape don't lie. And so having that, I think, could be crucial. We saw the boost from that, I think, from the last two top 10 wins they had against Tennessee and Clemson. Like, that poured some rocket fuel on that whole operation and saying, whoa, okay, South Carolina, what's going on over there? So just being able to have something real and something that you can't argue with, I think, is a world they would love to live in those battles with the Tar Heels.
Once again, JD Baquel of On3. Be sure to listen to the Hard Count on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern. JD, appreciate you hopping on today, bud.
Anytime, Mike. Enjoy the game, my man.
All right. That was JD Baquel from On3. Joining us today, and I appreciate everyone that bared with us there as we try to figure out what the audio issue was. Kind of stinks when you're the one-man band doing a show. It's tough to figure out what the issues are when you're also trying to do the show. So appreciate everyone that stuck around. And, well, because of that, we had nearly 2 hours of talking football. Gotta love that. Before we wrap things up, if you guys have any questions, fire away. Gonna do some ad reads real quick. Today's show, as it always is, brought to you by our good friend, Clint.Hammond. Get Clint's ad up there. There we go. Of the Movement Mortgage. If you're trying to buy a home right now, you know how difficult that can be, especially trying to find the best rates out there. When Wes Mitchell and former Gamecock quarterback Perry Orth were going through that process, they reached out to Clint, and Clint was able to help them out. Again, if you're trying to find a home right now, finding the best rates, it's not easy, but Clint and his team do a tremendous job, and they can be able to make that process much easier for you. So give them a call. Again, at the Movement Mortgage, that number is 803-771-6933. Today's show is also brought to you by MyPerfectFranchise.net. Shout out to our sponsor of the show, Andy Luedecke. Are you ready to leave the corporate rat race for the American dream? Looking for a side hustle while working your current job? Waiting to diversify, build wealth, and or leave a legacy? Andy can help you. Andy is a franchise owner, but he also gives counseling as well. And he helps people find the franchise that fit their skill set, financial requirements, time to commit, and much more. His services are 100% free, and he's here to help you if you have any questions about business ownership. So go visit myperfectfranchise.net. Today's show is also brought to you by our good friends over at Liberty Tax. Tax season right now, well, you got plenty of time, or at least it feels like that every year, right? Until it gets to that point when it actually is getting ready to be tax season. Give the call over to Liberty Tax, and they can help you get ready for tax season, get your stuff in order, and all that fun stuff that comes with tax season. Reach out to the folks at Liberty Tax to overcome that taxiety. I'm trying to pull up that number for you there. 803-462-5576. Our good friend Larry over at Liberty Tax. Well, boys and girls, it has been a long show, a lot of jumping around, but in the end, we were able to get that interview up. So again, appreciate everyone that stuck around with us. Seems like there's a couple comments here. Let's check this out. Happy. Always good to have you on, Michael Lynn. Good stuff. Thanks for keeping me entertained for 2 hours. Mike, appreciate you tuning in. God loves comics. Thank you for staying on board. It's a great show. Thomas Cox, over or under 70 points? Well, based on the prediction that I gave today on Gamecock Central, I said the score would be 34-27. So I have it at under for the 70-point mark. I think that, again, when you look at what South Carolina is trying to do offensively, I feel like they want to play fast. They want to do a high-tempo offense. But the question now becomes, are they going to be able to do that, right? It's one thing, and it's one of my favorite quotes. You know, Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a game plan until you get punched in the face. How is South Carolina going to adjust as this game plays out, especially if the offensive line isn't doing what they hope it can do? And I'm particularly looking at both left tackle and right tackle. So that's one of the big question marks. And if they have to slow the game down, you heard from JD. JD said, you know, sometimes the best defense is being able to have an offense that can just hold the football and contain the ball and be able to keep the other offense off the field. And when you're talking about a guy like Drake May, it's not a bad strategy. So I'm going to go with the under, but this is a game that could get ugly if South Carolina struggles to stop the run. If you're just joining us, that was one thing that I mentioned at the beginning of the show. You have to stop the run. You have to stop the run. Benjamin Moore says, brilliant point on Caleb Williams' success, taking pressure off Rattler. I think the real pressure now is that he is playing for his draft status. Well, I mean, I've been thinking about this over the last couple of weeks. I finally said it on a radio show on Tuesday this past week, but it's crazy how no one's really mentioning that at all and how it could help Rattler indirectly. Now, I'm making this up, but hypothetically speaking, I go into next Tuesday's press conference and I bring this up to Rattler. You think Rattler is going to say, oh, yeah, no, absolutely. It's helping me. He's not going to say anything. he's going to, I won't even say he'd downplay it. He would just be like, that's not something I'm thinking about. He would give the generic player response. Now, if you get Rattler away from the cameras and you ask him that, I'm sure he would be like, yeah, I mean, all these people who were ready to write me off after my career at Oklahoma because this guy comes in and replace me, he was really freaking good. Now, obviously, Rattler is a competitor. He wants to go out there and prove that he's the best. And that's the mentality that every player has. But the fact that Williams was the one that replaced him at Oklahoma, goes on to follow his coach, Lincoln Riley, and goes to Southern Cal and wins the Heisman, it just shows why Williams replaced Rattler when he was at Oklahoma. And I also feel like if you go back and you look at that season, you don't think Rattler was aware of what was going on over his shoulder? That added pressure of having to feel like you have to not just perform on a high level, but perform to a point where you can keep your job. Because if you don't, what's behind me? Oh, here's this young, talented guy they're bringing in that could potentially replace me. And what happened? You replaced him. So, again, indirectly, because it's not something I'm assuming. It's not, I don't even say assuming. It's not something Rattler probably even thinks about hardly ever, which is, man, Caleb Williams, won the Heisman. But the fact that he won it, I think it does take a little pressure off him in that he can just go out there and play. Like last season, he comes in here, he has a chip on his shoulder, and he probably still has a chip on his shoulder, but that chip was probably much bigger last year. And because that chip is smaller, at least in my opinion, it's smaller this year, he's able just to go out there and play. And I think that's why we've seen Rattler have the demeanor that he's had in these press conferences all offseason too, going back to spring football. He's more relaxed. He's more he's locked in on the game, but he seems more relaxed. Now, obviously, this past week on Tuesday, I mean, it seemed like he was just ready to play. He was like, just spot the damn ball and let's play right now. But I think that's something that shouldn't be overlooked. William Jones says, Rattler said, slow ball, fast ball, no problem. Yeah, they're going to mix things up. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? I can sit here and say what I feel like the offense will ultimately look like. And even if this is a team that wants to play fast, that tempo is up, all that stuff, that's great. But what does it look like based on the flow of the game, right? If the defense is struggling to catch their breath, you might have to slow things down a little bit. You might have to. You have to adjust. Again, going back to the Mike Tyson line, everyone's got a game plan so you get punched in the face. Both teams have a game plan going into this, but you have to be able to make adjustments. I mean, that's how football games are won and lost, making adjustments. Malik says, is there another player on the Gamecock roster that will be talked about the entire season other than Spencer Rattler? I'm going to talk locally. I mean, nationally, I think the natural answer would be Juice Wells, right? And obviously that means if you're talking on a national scale, then you're talking about them locally. So Juice Wells is a guy, especially if he can be as healthy as one could hope for as he heads into this first game, but to start the year off and he can perform the way that we all know that he's capable of performing, he's going to be a guy that gets talked about a lot this season. Defensively, on a national scale again, Nick Eamon-Worry, if he's able to perform well. DQ Smith is another guy I'd say. Those are the guys that I'd point to. Now, there's other factors of that, right? I mean, you could talk about Pup Howard or, if Desmond Umeozulu performs or if Nick Harbor comes onto the scene. We're talking about freshman All-Americans and freshman All-Conference, all that kind of stuff. That's a different type of talking about, right? But outside of Rattler, as far as locally, I feel like DQ Smith. I feel like DQ can be a guy that gets a lot of attention this year. I feel like he can. I feel like Xavier Leggett can be a guy locally that gets a lot of attention. I feel like AB, Marion Brown, could be another guy that gets talked about a lot. DeCarrion Joyner, what does it look like with him? Is he able to not only give you a chance to be consistent in that running back room, but does he get better as the year goes on? Is he going to be your week 1 starter and be the starter throughout the course of the season as you head into that final game of the regular season against Clemson? That can happen. Then you're going to hear a lot about those guys. I mean, naturally, the quarterback's always going to get talked about, right? I mean, you think back to the Jake Bentley era. I mean, Bentley had his own freaking press conference, for crying out loud, the way that it was set up. They would have Bentley would have a certain time, and then it went Coach Muschamp. So, I mean, it's always going to start with the quarterback. But I think there'll be other guys that'll be talked about. But naturally, if this team's playing well, especially from an offensive standpoint, Rattler will be the guy that people are talking about, not just locally, but nationally each week. All right, looking at some other questions, and we're going to wrap things up here. Georgia Bama grad 2011 says, do you think Eddie Lewis returns a punt for a tutty this year? Man was electric at Memphis. Also, do our Bo Sox make the playoffs? Well, I'll answer the easy question. The Red Sox aren't making the playoffs. They're a bunch of bums. So if you're a Braves fan, pulling for you guys. Have a great postseason run. The Yankees are in last place, so that makes me feel happy. As far as Eddie Lewis is concerned, he has the ability to do so. He has the speed to do so. The thing about punt returns for South Carolina, they're so aggressive when it comes to rushing the punter. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to set up some returns. And there also could be situations where, because they're sending so much pressure, and as I mentioned, if you have a Nicholas Harbor out there, whatever, the punt unit is going to have to stay back a little bit longer than they would like before their gunners go down the field to try to make the tackle. And that could spring a long return. So the thing with Eddie Lewis, I guess it just comes down to is he going to have enough space to be able to make that happen? If he's given space, I feel like he's a ticking time bomb to just be able to go off and have a huge return. I think he'll have at least one return this year, whether it be on kickoff, if he gets some work on kickoff, whether it be on punt, especially. I think he'll have at least one return for a touchdown. I think he will. I mean, this is a team, though, too. Again, we're talking about just the pressure that South Carolina applies on punt units. They'll probably have at least another 3 punt blocks this year. Three blocked kicks in general. 3, 4, 5, whatever the case may be. Whether it be punts, whether it be field goals, whether it be PATs. This is a team that puts pressure on you. So it's a combination of a couple things, right? I mean, how many opportunities is he going to be able to get? Where are these punts taking place? And some of that has to do sometimes with not just your defense, but your offense. And the fact that South Carolina has a phenomenal punter who can flip the field, that can help the offense a little bit if they're struggling at times and they're not able to necessarily move the football. Kai does a tremendous job of flipping the field. So, if you're back there returning kicks and the opposing offense is moving to the 50-yard line, makes it a little bit more challenging to be able to get a return if you're in the shadow of your own end zone. But we'll see. We'll see. David says, what's your prediction of the game? Payne, Clubber Lang. Good old Clubber Lang from the Rocky series. What are you predicting, Clubber? Payne. Garrett says, sorry if you already talked about this, but is the newest defensive end transfer going to see the field any this weekend? He's ready to go. I wouldn't be shocked to see if we see him. How much we see him, that's a different story. And a lot of that has to do with how comfortable not just the player is, but how comfortable this coaching staff is with where he is in terms of being up to speed with what they're asking him to do from a playbook standpoint. On top of that, too, you have other players that have already been here. So if this guy's able to come in here and make an impact right away, I mean, that's great. But that also would tell me, man, our guys didn't have a good preseason camp. Now, I don't think that's the case. You know what I mean? So I think he's going to have to continue to earn the trust of not just the coaching staff, but the players around him. But I expect as the year goes on, especially over the next couple weeks, if he's having good practices, you'll see those snap counts go up for him. But week one, again, kind of like the theme of this show, so many unknowns that I mean, I'm not going to hold my breath that he's going to get a lot of plays simply for the fact of what I just said, that he just got here. It would send a wrong message, in my opinion, to the rest of the players on the team, especially if they've had some pretty good practices out there in this preseason. But I do think as the year goes on, he'll have more opportunities to go play. Williams says, with Satterfield, it took too long to call plays, too complicated. Yeah, I mean, that's another part of it too. And I think you will see this at times based on what we saw. And this is why I keep saying that I expect South Carolina to do a tempo offense, fast pace, based on some of the things I've been told, as well as what we were able to see in the limited amount of time practice. There was one period in particular where Rattler was going out there, and I know some people hate this stuff. It's a check with me call, which they did when Satterfield was still here, where they'll get up to the line of scrimmage, right? Rattler does his cadence, and then he looks over to the sideline. He checks. Now, from what we've been told, according to Dal Loggins will be up in the press box. So who's that coach on the sideline that's going to be signaling things in, which obviously come down from the headset from Dal. Rattler, from what we've been told, has more freedom when he gets to the line of scrimmage to be able to check out of plays and all that kind of stuff. So, again, I do think that you're going to see at times South Carolina do that fast tempo offense, but you'll also notice as they get to the line of scrimmage, looking over, the check with me calls. So I don't think that's going anywhere, at least from what we've seen, but we'll have to wait and see. Woo! 2+ hours today. Appreciate everyone that tuned in today. Appreciate everyone that beared with us. I mean, no, we weren't expecting to do 2 hours today. I can tell you that much. But because of the circumstances with the audio issues that we had with J.D. Baquel early on, we went a little bit longer. We had to dance around a little bit just to find a way to get that to work, but at the same time, too, entertaining you guys who tuned in today. So we appreciate that. If you missed any of our program today, again, head on over to the Gamecock Central YouTube page. You can watch this show in its entirety. We have GC Live shows every weekday throughout the course of the season. Every weekday. Just a reminder for people that may have missed it earlier in the week. Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, okay? Wes and Chris will be doing their GC Live shows. Those will start at 2 p.m. On Thursdays, you have GC Live Afternoon Drive. I'll be doing those at 2. Probably have JD come on more based on my conversation with JD. Hopefully, be able to get him on live for some of those shows so that if you guys have any questions, you can ask him directly. And then on Tuesday night, that is the only time difference for GC Live. That will be at 7. That is the GC Live Talking Tuesday nights with me and intern Joe. On the weekends, we will have the post-game show immediately after games. This weekend, it appears that Michael Scarnecchia, former Gamecock quarterback, will be back with us this year, and he'll be on for the post-game show of week 1. On Sunday nights, intern Joe, God help us all, we have given little intern Joe keys to his own show. He's going to be doing a show called The Walkthrough. That's going to be coming out at night. That's a pre-tape show. I think that's going to be coming out around like 7 o'clock at night. There's not a time set yet for Joe, but I'd say it's about 7. Again, it's pre-tape, so whenever you have a chance, just click on it right before watching Sunday Night Football. And that'll kind of be a wrap-up of the week that was. And then we'll also have some other stuff in there between these GC Live shows. I also believe Wes was saying that he thought it was pretty sure, but I don't know if it's a done deal quite yet, Before the Sandstorm, the show that Wes and Kendall did last year. That should be back. We'll wait for Wes or Kendall to give the official confirmation on that. But that's kind of like a pregame show on Saturdays. And then we'll also have Mix in a Water Mondays, which is a breakdown talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly with a former Gamecock football player. Those will come out on Mondays, and we'll also have plenty of other content in between. But again, appreciate everyone that tuned in today. Again, the YouTube page. But if you're a podcast listener, head on over to the Gamecock Central podcast platform. This one is 2+ hours. So if you're heading up to Charlotte from the Columbia area, or maybe you're just a little bit further out, I don't know, and you need some football in your life and you miss some of this stuff, head on back, download it, and you'll be good to go. Georgia Bama grad 2011 says, congrats, Joe. Love all you gents at Gamecock Central as a lifelong Gamecock fan born in the Low Country. Always great to see. Well, we appreciate you and everyone that tuned in today for this, what was a marathon of a show. These shows will not be 2 hours plus, I can tell you, moving forward in the future. But we had to roll with the punches today. Hopefully be able to get that phone line up and running for next Thursday so we can make these shows just a little bit different than what Wes and Chris are doing. They're doing a great job with their shows, but I think that's the beauty of having different people do these shows, is that it's kind of like going to a movie theater, right? I mean, you're not just seeing the same movie, or you're going to the grocery store. You don't have to just get Pepsi or Coke or whatever. You have variety, right? So that's what we're going to try to do. And that's what I told intern Joe about that Sunday night show. I said, make it your own. Make it your own. So all these shows will be a little bit different, and that will be the intention moving forward. Again, appreciate everyone that tuned in today. If you're heading up to Charlotte, whether it be tomorrow, whether it be on Saturday, safe travels. Enjoy the game. Be safe. And we'll see. We'll see what happens. We'll see what this Gamecock team is all about week 1 as they go up against a Power 5 team, and a tremendous, tremendous opportunity to send a message to the rest of the college football world. That starts with Spencer Rattler. That starts with Shane Beamer. That starts with a team that is hungry and looking to prove to people that they are taking steps forward. It's not one step forward, 2 steps back as they head into year 3. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. If you're heading on over to Carolina Calls tonight at 6 for Shane Beamer's show at Backstreet Grills, maybe I'll see you. Maybe I'll see you. Come on over, say hello. I'll be with the legend himself, Kirk Collinsworth. Again, everybody, have yourself a great Thursday and have yourself a great weekend. College football, 5 straight days of it starts tonight. Enjoy.